Sandra Bullock whispered to Keanu Reeves. Her words changed everything. The story begins on a quiet evening. The sun had almost disappeared behind the city skyline, leaving only a faint orange glow that slowly faded into gray. The streets were still filled with people, rushing to their own lives, unaware of the silent battles carried in the hearts of those walking among them. Inside a small cafe, hidden at the corner of a quiet street, sat Sandra Bullock. She wore no heavy makeup, no expensive clothes, just a simple sweater and jeans. She looked tired, but her eyes carried a calm depth, the kind of depth only people who had lived through storms could have. She was waiting. Her hands rested on the table, fingers slowly tapping, not out of impatience, but out of the weight of 1,000 thoughts. She had carried these words inside her for years, words she never dared to say. Tonight she had decided she could not hold them anymore. Tonight she needed to speak, even if her voice trembled. The cafe door opened gently, the small bell above it giving a soft ring. Keanu Reeves stepped inside. He looked as simple as always in a plain jacket and worn-out shoes. He did not walk with the arrogance of fame. He walked like any other man, his head slightly lowered, his steps quiet. When his eyes found Sandra, a small smile appeared on his face, warm and kind, like the kind of smile that could ease the weight of the world for just a moment. He sat across from her. There was no rush in his movements, no need to fill the silence with meaningless words. He simply looked at her with patience, as if saying without speaking, "Take your time." Sandra's throat felt dry. She opened her mouth, then closed it again. There were so many ways she could begin, but every start felt too small for what lived inside her. Finally, with a trembling breath, she whispered, "I need to tell you something I should have said long ago." The weight of those words filled the small cafe. Even the soft music playing in the background seemed to fade away. Keanu leaned forward slightly, his eyes filled with respect and quiet attention. He did not interrupt, did not hurry her. His silence was not empty, it was powerful. It told her she was safe. Her hands shook. She pressed them together as if holding herself steady. "For years," she continued, "I have watched you live with so much kindness. People only see your fame, your face on the screen, but I have seen something deeper. I have seen how you listen to others, how you stand quietly when others are loud, how you give without expecting anything back. And it made me think about myself. It made me question who I was, what I had given to this world. I realized there were parts of me I had buried, fears I never faced, truths I never spoke." Keanu's expression did not change. His gaze was steady, filled with humility, as if he could not imagine himself being someone so extraordinary in her eyes. That humility itself made her heart ache. Sandra lowered her eyes, her voice soft, almost breaking. "There was a time when I felt lost. I was surrounded by people, yet I felt alone. Everyone expected me to be strong, to smile, to perform. But inside, I was falling apart. I did not know where to go with all that pain. And then I remembered something you once told me, a simple line, so simple I thought I would forget it. You said, sometimes being gentle is the strongest thing you can be." Her lips trembled as she repeated those words. "You don't know this, Keanu, but those words saved me." The cafe lights flickered softly, and for a long moment, neither of them spoke. Sandra's voice had cracked open a memory she had carried alone for years. The sound of her whisper was not weak. It was powerful, because it came from the rawest part of her heart. Keanu leaned back slightly, his eyes glistening as though a hidden storm had just moved through them. He shook his head slowly, almost in disbelief, and whispered back, "I never knew." Sandra looked up at him then, her eyes wet. "How could you know? I never told you. I was too afraid, but you deserve to know now. You changed something in me. You gave me strength when I thought I had none left." Her voice caught again, but this time she did not stop. "And maybe tonight I need to tell you because I feel like we are running out of time. Not in the way people think, not because of age or years, but because silence can steal more from us than death ever could." The words hit the air like a secret too heavy to carry. Keanu's hand moved slowly across the table, resting close to hers but not touching, as if asking permission. His voice was quiet but steady. "Then don't let silence take this moment from you. Say everything you need to say. I am here, I am listening." And in that instant the world outside faded. The cars passing by, the strangers hurrying home, the noise of the city, all of it disappeared. There was only Sandra, her trembling whisper, and Keanu's patient eyes. The kind of eyes that could hold another person's pain without turning away. Her heart pounded. There was more to say, much more. But for now, she felt something shift inside her. She had spoken. She had broken the silence. And even though her voice was fragile, her truth was finally free. This was only the beginning. The night deepened outside the cafe, yet inside, time seemed to slow. The soft hum of the lights above cast a faint glow on the wooden table between them. Sandra's hands trembled, but she felt a strange lightness after speaking the words she had carried for so long. Keanu's quiet presence made the moment feel sacred, as if the entire world was holding its breath with them. She whispered again, her voice low but urgent. "I thought if I stayed silent, everything would be easier. But silence only built walls. It locked me in a place where I could not breathe. Tonight, I want to break those walls even if it hurts." Keanu's gaze stayed fixed on her, his eyes calm, steady, but behind that calm there was something raw. He did not look away, not even for a second. He allowed her pain to exist in the open, without shame, without judgment. Sandra took a deep breath, steadying herself. "I remember the first time I really noticed it in you. It was years ago during a press tour. Everyone around us was rushing, pushing, demanding attention. And you were just standing by the side, helping a stagehand who had dropped his papers. Nobody else noticed him. Nobody else cared. But you bent down, gathered his papers, and gave him a smile that told him he mattered. I stood there and thought, how can someone so famous, someone who could choose to ignore the world, be so gentle? It stayed with me, it shook something inside me." Her words grew heavier. "And yet I never said anything, I just watched. I told myself it wasn't important, but it was. Because that moment came back to me when I was breaking apart. And I realized, you live in a way that reminds people they are not invisible. You did that for me without even knowing it." Keanu's lips pressed together as though he wanted to speak but couldn't. He rubbed his hands slowly, as if searching for the right words but finding none. Finally, he leaned closer and whispered, "Sometimes I wonder if those little things even matter. I never thought they reached anyone." Sandra's eyes softened with tears. "They matter. They matter more than you know. You taught me something I had forgotten. That kindness does not need to be loud. It can be quiet, it can be small, and still it can save someone. You saved me without even realizing it." There was silence, deep and full, almost like a third presence sitting with them. Outside, a car horn sounded, breaking the stillness, but inside the cafe the air held their truths. Sandra hesitated, her next words trembling on her lips. "But there is something more, something I never wanted to face." Keanu's brow furrowed slightly, not with impatience, but with a concern that felt almost protective. "What is it?" he asked softly, her chest tightened. The words had lived inside her for too long, but she could no longer keep them buried. "I blamed myself for too much, for things I could not control. I wore a smile when inside I was drowning. And I told myself I had no right to burden anyone with that pain. But then I saw you, carrying your own losses, your own scars, and yet still giving light to others. And I realized I had been wrong. Maybe sharing pain is not weakness. Maybe it is the only way we survive it." Tears slid down her cheeks now, unchecked. She wiped them quickly, almost embarrassed, but Keanu shook his head gently. "Don't hide them," he whispered. "Your tears are part of your truth. You don't need to be strong here." Those words broke something open. Sandra leaned forward, her voice trembling harder than before. "There was a night when I thought of giving up. Completely. The world felt empty, and I felt like I had nothing left to give. And in that moment, your face came to my mind. Not your movie face, not the star people cheer for, but the quiet man I once saw helping someone no one noticed. I thought if he can keep giving when he has every reason not to, then maybe I can survive one more day. And I did. And the next day, and the next. Until I found myself here, finally able to say this to you." Keanu's breath caught. His hands clenched together tightly, as though holding back a storm inside him. His eyes glistened, not with pity, but with something far deeper, an understanding born of his own pain. "Sandra," he whispered, but his voice broke, and he could not finish. The silence that followed was heavy, but it was not empty. It was full of everything they had never said, everything that had lived quietly in the spaces between their lives. Then Sandra added softly, "I don't tell you this to make you carry me. I tell you this because I want you to know you are not invisible either. Your kindness, your quiet strength, it reached me. It changed me. And I believe it has touched more lives than you could ever imagine." The cafe had grown quieter, only one other table occupied at the far corner. The waiter passed by but did not disturb them, as if sensing something sacred unfolding. Keanu leaned forward now, his voice low, steady, but filled with emotion. "I've carried my own silences too. I've lost people I loved. I've lived through days when I thought the world would never make sense again. Sometimes I felt like disappearing. But I kept moving, not because I was strong, but because I didn't know what else to do. Hearing what you just said, it makes me wonder if maybe those small moments were never small at all. Sandra held his gaze, her tears still fresh but her voice steadier now. They weren't. They were everything. For the first time, Keanu's hand gently touched hers, not as a gesture of comfort, but as a quiet acknowledgement of shared truth. Two lives that had carried pain in silence had finally met in the middle. The world outside kept rushing, but in that small cafe, time itself seemed to bend. They sat there, two souls scarred yet still alive, realizing that sometimes the most powerful things are said in whispers. And in that moment, both of them understood. This was only the beginning of a conversation that could change everything. The rain had started outside, soft at first, then slowly building until it tapped against the cafe windows like a gentle drum. The sound wrapped around the quiet space, creating an almost sacred rhythm for their conversation. Sandra sat still, her hand resting under Keanu's, and though the world outside seemed restless, inside she felt a fragile peace, the kind that comes when you finally release words you thought you would carry to your grave. She drew in a shaky breath and whispered, "There is something I never wanted anyone to know. I hid it because I thought people would see me differently, maybe even think less of me. But keeping it inside has made me feel like I was living half a life." Her eyes lifted, shimmering with fear. "And I can't live like that anymore?" Keanu didn't move, didn't let go. His eyes softened, holding her like a safe place. "Then let it out," he said, voice gentle. "Let me carry some of it with you. You don't need to carry it alone." Sandra's throat tightened. Her voice trembled as she confessed. "Years ago, during one of my hardest times, I felt like a failure. I thought people only loved the image of me, not the real person. I was drowning in expectations, and every night I cried myself to sleep. I kept telling myself I had to be strong, that if I let anyone see me weak, they'd walk away. But the truth is, I was breaking. I thought of walking away from everything, my career, my dreams, even my life. I thought nobody would notice if I disappeared." The weight of her words sank into the silence. Keanu's face tensed, not with judgment but with deep empathy. He nodded slowly, as if he too knew the sharp edge of that loneliness. She pressed on, tears blurring her vision. "Then one night I saw a photo of you, just sitting alone on a park bench, eating quietly. No guards, no spotlight, no one praising you, just you and the world. And it hit me, you had every reason to hide behind fame, to build walls, but you didn't. You sat there like everyone else, carrying your pain quietly but still living. It told me maybe I didn't have to give up. Maybe I could keep breathing, even if I was hurting. And from that night, I promised myself I would survive one more day at a time, because if you could keep going, then maybe I could too." Her whisper cracked at the end, and she lowered her head, ashamed of how raw she had become. But Keanu leaned in, his hand tightening gently around hers. "You don't need to be ashamed," he said softly. "I know what it feels like to carry that weight. I've been there too. I've lost people I loved. I've sat in rooms filled with noise and still felt completely alone. And sometimes I wondered if anyone would notice if I disappeared. I know that darkness. I've lived with it." Sandra's eyes widened, startled by his openness. "You too," she whispered, almost not believing. He nodded. "Yes, and you're right. Sometimes it's the smallest things that pull you back from the edge. A stranger's smile, a kind word. Or maybe just sitting quietly, knowing the world hasn't ended yet. I never thought anyone noticed those moments, but hearing you now, it makes me realize maybe the things we think are invisible are the very things keeping someone else alive." The rain outside grew heavier, streaming down the glass, blurring the view of the street. Inside, their words hung in the air, fragile but unbreakable. Sandra's tears fell faster now, but she didn't hide them. "I wish I had told you sooner," she whispered. "I wish I hadn't let fear keep me silent for so long. You deserve to know what your kindness gave me. You deserve to know how much you mattered, even when you thought no one was watching." Keanu's jaw tightened, emotion flickering across his face. He lowered his head for a moment, then looked back at her, his voice deep with sincerity. "And you deserve to know that you are not a failure. You are not weak. Surviving what you went through, that is strength. Telling me this now, that is courage. Don't ever think less of yourself for feeling pain. It means you are human, and it means you are alive." For a long moment, Sandra couldn't speak. His words settled into her like a balm on wounds that had been open for years. She felt lighter, as though the chains she had worn inside her chest were finally loosening. But then she took a deep breath, steadying herself, because there was still something more. Something she had carried not just as pain, but as regret. "There is one more truth," she whispered, her voice shaking. "It is the hardest one, and I don't know if I can even say it." Keanu leaned closer, his gaze unwavering. "Say it. Whatever it is, I will not turn away." Her lips trembled, fear clawing at her throat, but she forced the words out. "I loved you. I loved you in silence for years. I buried it under friendship, under respect, under fear of ruining what we had. But the truth is, I loved you, and maybe I still do." The cafe seemed to freeze. The air thickened, the sound of the rain echoing louder as if the world outside had leaned in to listen. Keanu's eyes widened slightly, not with shock, but with something unreadable, pain, longing, maybe both. He didn't answer right away. Instead, he looked down, his breath heavy, as if he was wrestling with his own truth. The silence stretched, filling the space between them like a fragile thread. Finally, his voice broke through, low and trembling. "Sandra, there are things I never said either. Things I buried because I thought the world would not allow me to live them. But hearing you now, it feels like something inside me has been waiting for this moment too." Sandra's heart pounded, her tears streaming freely, unsure if she had just broken everything or opened the door to something she had longed for all her life. Outside, the storm raged, but inside the cafe, two souls sat with truths laid bare, knowing nothing would ever be the same again. The storm outside grew stronger, the rain hitting the windows in wild rhythms, almost like the world itself was echoing the storm inside their hearts. The cafe had grown nearly empty now, only the faint sound of dishes clinking in the back and the rain pressing against the glass. Sandra's confession still hung heavy in the air, raw and trembling, her whispered truth breaking years of silence. Keanu sat across from her, his eyes lowered, his breath deep and uneven, as though her words had cracked open something inside him that he had long buried. Sandra stared at him, terrified of the silence. Her chest tightened as doubt rushed in, filling her with fear that she had said too much, that she had ruined the fragile bond they shared. She whispered, almost pleading, "Say something, please, don't let me sit in this silence." Keanu finally lifted his eyes, and the look in them made her heart stop. They were not filled with rejection nor with pity, but with a deep, quiet ache. His voice was low, rough, almost as if he was speaking against years of restraint. "You are not alone in this. I felt it too. I tried to bury it, to kill it, because I thought it wasn't allowed. I thought if I let myself want what I wanted, I would lose everything. But hearing you now, I realize I wasn't the only one carrying it." Sandra's breath caught. Her eyes widened, her hands trembling as she searched his face, desperate to believe his words were real. You felt it too?" He nodded slowly, his jaw tight. "Yes, from the very beginning. But I told myself I had to protect you, protect us. I thought silence was safer than truth. I thought if I kept it hidden, at least I wouldn't lose you. But silence is cruel, Sandra. It steals moments we can never get back." His words pierced her chest, breaking something wide open inside her. Tears streamed down her face, but this time she didn't wipe them away. All these years, all this time we could have had, and we let it slip away because of fear. Keanu leaned forward, his hands gripping hers now with more strength. "Fear has stolen too much from us already. Maybe it's time we stop letting it win." But even as hope flickered between them, a shadow of doubt crept into Sandra's heart. She shook her head, her voice quivering. "It's not that simple. We are not ordinary people. The world watches us, judges us, twists every word, every look. What we share, it would not be ours alone. It would belong to everyone else too. Could we survive that? Could we stay true under that kind of weight?" Keanu's eyes darkened with thought. He looked down, as though the weight of her question pressed heavily on him too. After a long pause, he said quietly, "Maybe the world will never understand. But maybe it doesn't need to. Maybe what matters is that we understand. That we hold on no matter how loud the world gets." His words were steady, but Sandra could hear the unspoken fear beneath them, the fear of once again losing what they had barely begun to reclaim. She leaned back in her chair, her chest rising and falling quickly. "Do you know what scares me the most?" she asked softly, her voice almost breaking. "It's not the world, it's not the cameras. It's the thought that I could open myself to you completely and then lose you. I don't think I could survive that." Keanu's hand tightened on hers, his eyes glistening with emotion he could no longer hide. "You won't lose me, not now. Not after everything we've confessed tonight. If we walk away from this, we lose anyway. At least this way, we stand a chance." Their eyes locked, and for a long moment nothing else existed. But then, as if the universe wanted to test them, a sudden clap of thunder shook the cafe. The lights flickered, and in that split second, Sandra felt her entire body tense with dread, as though the storm outside had mirrored the storm of fate waiting for them. She whispered shakily, "It feels like the world itself is warning us, like it knows something we don't." Keanu shook his head gently. "Or maybe it's telling us to be brave. Storms don't last forever. They pass. And when they do, the world feels new again." His words wrapped around her like a fragile hope, yet fear still clung to her chest. She leaned closer, her voice trembling. "Then promise me something. Promise me that if we step into this truth, you will not walk away when it gets hard. Promise me you won't let silence steal from us again." Keanu's eyes burned with intensity, his voice steady and strong. "I promise. I will not walk away. I will not let silence win again. Whatever storms come, we face them together." The conviction in his words struck deep into her heart, but just as hope began to grow, Sandra's body shook with another wave of doubt. She whispered, "What if the storm takes more than we can give?" Keanu leaned closer still, so close she could feel the warmth of his breath. His voice was quiet but fierce. "Then we give what we can and we hold on to each other. That is all we need." For the first time that night, Sandra let out a shaky laugh through her tears, a sound fragile but real. "You always make it sound so simple." He smiled faintly, though his eyes were still wet. "Maybe that's because it is. Maybe we're the ones who make it complicated." The rain outside began to slow, the storm easing, though the sky remained dark and heavy. Inside the cafe, the storm between them had shifted too. What had begun as fear and silence was slowly transforming into fragile courage. They sat there, hands entwined, hearts trembling, knowing that they stood at the edge of something they could no longer deny. And though the world outside remained uncertain, inside that small cafe, two souls made a silent vow. They would not let silence steal from them again. But deep within both of them, a question still lingered, haunting and sharp. Was love enough to survive the weight of the world that waited outside those doors? The storm had calmed, but the streets outside were slick with rain, reflecting the faint glow of streetlights like broken shards of gold scattered across the pavement. Inside the cafe, the air felt heavy, not from silence, but from the weight of truths that could no longer be unsaid. Sandra and Keanu sat across from one another, hands still intertwined, hearts pounding with the fragile courage of two souls who had finally stopped hiding. Sandra's breath trembled as she whispered, "We've spoken truths that could change everything. But what happens when we step outside? What happens when the world sees us, not as two people, but as their idea of us?" Keanu leaned back slightly, his eyes dark with thought. He had lived long enough to know the cruelty of the spotlight, the way fame magnified everything, even the smallest gesture. He let out a long breath and said quietly, "The world will see what it wants to see. It always has. But what matters is what we know here now. What matters is the truth we've shared." Sandra's lips parted, her eyes wet. "But truth isn't always enough. I've seen how the world can twist kindness into weakness, how it can turn love into spectacle. And the thought of losing what we have, it terrifies me more than any headline." Keanu leaned forward, his voice steady. "Then let's make a choice. Not for the world, not for the cameras, but for ourselves. We don't have to tell anyone. We don't have to prove anything. What we share can stay here, sacred, untouchable." His words offered safety, but they also carried a sharp edge, because secrets, too, could become prisons. Sandra felt it, that tug-of-war between the desire to protect and the fear of suffocating in silence again. Her voice broke as she whispered, "I don't want to hide anymore. I've lived too long behind masks. I've smiled for crowds while I was dying inside. If this is real, if you truly feel what I feel, then I don't want it to live in the shadows." Keanu's eyes softened, his chest rising and falling as he searched her face. "And if the world tears it apart?" he asked gently. She swallowed hard, her tears slipping down her cheeks. "Then at least we will know we tried. At least we will know we were brave enough to live it, not bury it." Keanu reached across the table and touched her cheek, his thumb brushing away a tear. His voice dropped to a whisper, "You've always been braver than you believe." A small smile trembled on her lips, fragile but real. But before she could answer, the cafe door opened. The soft bell rang and a sudden chill swept inside. A young man in a hooded jacket stepped in, his phone in hand, his eyes scanning the room. At first it seemed ordinary, just another customer. But when his gaze fell on Sandra and Keanu, recognition sparked instantly. His hand froze on his phone, then lifted, the screen angled just enough to capture them. Sandra stiffened, her breath catching. Keanu noticed too, his jaw tightening, but he didn't move. The young man's eyes widened with excitement as he whispered into his phone, already typing furiously. The moment broke like glass. The sacred privacy of their conversation was gone, replaced by the cold reality of the outside world. Sandra's voice shook. "It's starting already." Keanu's hand tightened over hers. "Don't look at him, look at me. Stay here, stay with me." But even as he spoke, the sound of the young man's hurried steps filled the cafe. The doorbell chimed again as he rushed back into the night, carrying their fragile secret into the vast, hungry world. Sandra's chest tightened, her mind racing. By tomorrow, everyone will know, not just that we were here, but everything they think we mean. They'll build their own story, they'll twist it. And we'll have no control. Keanu leaned forward, his voice calm but firm. Then let them write whatever story they want. Ours is here in this moment. They can't touch that. Her heart ached at his steadiness, yet fear still gnawed at her. You say that now, but I've seen what happens when the world decides it owns your truth. It doesn't stop until it takes everything. Keanu's eyes glistened, his voice deep and steady. Then we fight for what's ours. Not with anger, not with noise, but with resilience, with kindness. We've both lived long enough to know the world cannot destroy what is built on truth. Sandra looked at him, searching his face, trying to anchor herself in his words. And for a moment she believed him, but doubt whispered still, pulling at her. What if they take you from me? What if this costs us the very thing we're trying to protect? Keanu shook his head, his voice steady as stone. They can't take me from you, not if we choose each other, not if we hold on no matter how hard it gets. The rain outside had slowed, leaving behind a quiet mist that clung to the glass. Inside, the air was thick with the weight of their choice. Sandra leaned forward, her voice breaking but strong. Then promise me this, whatever happens when we walk out of this cafe, we face it together. No silence, no hiding, no running. Keanu's eyes locked on hers, unwavering. I promise. And in that moment, with the world already moving against them, they chose to face it. Not as actors, not as stars, not as names the world claimed to know, but as two people, fragile yet unafraid, bound together by a truth too powerful to bury again. But as they rose from their seats, hands still entwined, Sandra's heart whispered a question she did not dare speak aloud. What if love itself was not enough to survive what waited for them outside those doors? The night air was sharp and cool when they stepped out of the cafe. The rain had left the streets glistening, the reflections of streetlights stretching across the wet pavement like fragile threads of gold. Sandra held tightly to Keanu's hand, her heart racing with a mixture of courage and fear. Somewhere in the distance, the sound of a car splashed through puddles, but around them the street was quiet, too quiet, as if the world itself was pausing to see what they would do next. Sandra whispered, "It feels different now, like the world is already watching us." Keanu glanced at her, his expression calm but heavy with understanding. They might be watching, they might be waiting, but they don't get to decide what we are. Only we do. His steadiness comforted her, yet she couldn't shake the memory of the young man in the cafe, his phone capturing a moment that was never meant to be shared. By morning, the headlines would spread, stories written without truth, opinions shouted without knowing the weight of what had truly passed between them. As they walked together down the empty street, Sandra's voice trembled. We've said our truths, but how do we live them when the world tries to twist them? Keanu squeezed her hand, his voice low, steady, but full of quiet conviction. We live them by holding on, by refusing to let noise drown out what's real. People will talk, they always do. But at the end of the day, when the cameras fade and the lights go out, it's still just us. And if we remember that, nothing can break us. His words settled deep into her, though the fear still lingered. The next morning came faster than either of them expected. The world moved swiftly, faster than rain falling from the sky. Photographs of them leaving the cafe filled every corner of the internet. Headlines screamed their own stories. Secret romance revealed. A bond that was hidden for years. Truth behind the smiles. People debated, speculated, twisted. Some cheered, others criticized, but very few understood. Sandra sat in her living room, staring at the screen, her chest tight. The world had done exactly what she feared. It had turned their truth into spectacle. Her phone buzzed endlessly with messages. Reporters filled the streets outside her home, and the silence she had once craved was now gone. But then, Keanu walked in. He had insisted on being there by her side, not as an escape from the noise, but as proof that his promise was real. He set down 2 cups of coffee on the table, calm despite the storm raging outside. She looked at him, her voice shaking. They've taken it, Keanu. They've taken something sacred and turned it into noise. I don't know if I can survive this. He sat beside her, his hand finding hers again. His voice was steady, carrying the same strength that had carried him through his own storms. They haven't taken it. They've only seen the surface. They don't know the truth of what was said, what was felt. That belongs to us, and no one can steal it." Her tears came again, but this time they were softer, lighter. She whispered, "How do you stay so calm?" He smiled faintly, sadness and resilience mingling in his eyes. "Because I've learned that storms always pass. I've lived through worse, and I'm still here. And now I'm not alone. That makes the storm easier to face." Sandra leaned against him, resting her head on his shoulder. For the first time, the noise outside seemed far away. Days passed, and though the world didn't stop talking, something unexpected began to happen. Amidst the noise, amidst the speculation, people started to notice something different. It wasn't the scandal they expected, or the drama they wanted. It was the quiet strength with which Sandra and Keanu faced it all. No shouting, no fighting, no need to prove anything. Just the quiet truth of two people choosing each other despite the storm. Messages poured in from strangers around the world. People wrote about how their courage reminded them to speak their own truths, to face their own fears, to stop hiding behind silence. What began as gossip transformed into something else. An unspoken lesson that kindness, humility, and truth could survive even in the loudest of worlds. One evening, as the sun set in streaks of gold across the horizon, Sandra and Keanu sat together on her balcony. The air was quiet now, the storm having passed, leaving only a fragile peace. Sandra looked at him, her eyes soft but steady. "Do you ever think about what might have been if we had spoken sooner?" Keanu turned to her, his gaze gentle. "Sometimes, but then I think maybe it had to happen now. Maybe we needed the years, the silence, the storms to finally understand the weight of what we carry now, and maybe that's what makes this moment so powerful." She smiled through her tears, her heart lighter than it had been in years. "Maybe you're right. Maybe it was always meant to be now." He reached for her hand again, the same hand he had held in the cafe, the same hand he had promised never to let go. And in that simple gesture, she knew that no matter what the world said, no matter what storms still lay ahead, their truth had already changed everything. Their story was no longer about silence or fear or hiding. It was about courage. It was about resilience. It was about love whispered in the quiet, strong enough to survive the noise of the world. And as the last light of the sun dipped below the horizon, Sandra closed her eyes, her voice soft but steady. "We are free now. No more silence." Keanu squeezed her hand, his whisper carrying the strength of every promise he had ever made. No more silence, only truth. And in that moment, as the world continued spinning, two souls found peace, not because the storm had spared them, but because they had chosen to face it together.